She never conquered empires. She never led an army. Yet her body became one of Europe's most famous exhibitions. This is not fame. It was humiliation disguised as science. It's a story of a woman named Saartjie Baartman, the so-called Hottentot Venus. So stay with me because her story doesn't end where you think it would. I am Joana, and today we uncover one of history's most uncomfortable stories. Not of war, not of theft, but of humiliation paraded as science. This story is about how the world confuses curiosity with cruelty. It's about how a body can be stolen long before it dies. Saartjie was from Khoikhoi people of South Africa, proud, brilliant, and deeply misunderstood by European explorers. To really understand Saartjie, let's start with the beginning. She was born in Khoikhoi when South Africa was under the Dutch-British colonial rule. There's no documentation of her birth name. That makes it even worse because her mother died when she was an infant and her father was later killed by bushmen while driving cattle. But we know she was called Saartjie. I think they even translated it to Sarah. Later on, I'll tell you something interesting about this name. So, as a result of her parents dying, Saartjie spent her childhood and teenage years in Dutch European farms. But something interesting happened. A free black trader, you know, the black who wasn't enslaved, Peter Caesar, met her and encouraged her to move to Cape Town. She lived in Cape Town for at least 2 years, working in his household as a washerwoman and a nursemaid. First for Peter Caesar, then in the house of a Dutchman in Cape Town. But she finally moved and became a wet nurse in the household of Peter Caesar's brother, Hendrik Caesar. We learned that she had 2 children, but they died as babies. Since the beginning of her life, I don't think she has had a simple happy moment. She's either working or dealing with death or grief. First her parents, then her children. But then there's a ray of happiness. She had a relationship with a poor Dutch soldier, Hendrik van Jonk, who lived near Cape Town, but that relationship ended when his regiment left Cape Town. So it was as if Saartjie came to this life to suffer. Now, you think that's where her suffering ended, but no. Soon Hendrik, that's not her boyfriend, Hendrik Caesar, the brother of the other one, began to show her at a city hospital where Surgeon Alexander Dunlop worked in exchange for cash. Dunlop, who was a Scottish military surgeon in the Cape Town slave lodge, suggested she should travel to Europe to make money by exhibiting herself. Well, we could call that modeling, right? But wait, when she arrives in Europe, poster goes up. People line up the street to see Hottentot Venus. They made her stand on stage, have dress paraded, laughed at her, the crowd gawking at her body. The commodification of women's body has a long history indeed. Did she agree to this? Some say she signed a contract. Others say she was coerced. Other sources claim she signed a contract, but that contract was as a servant, but the terms were likely false, right? But what we know is that Saartjie refused at first when Dunlop, that surgeon, suggested it. Dunlop persisted and Saartjie said she would not go unless Hendrik Caesar comes along. In 1810, he agreed to go to Britain to make money, but by putting her on stages. So you could see there was pimping happening here. Was she free? Was she forced? Let me know what you think. The acceptance after her earlier refusal could mean that she was also coerced, or simply she changed her mind when Caesar joined. That's what some say. Dunlop was playing the long game. He thought he could make money, milk the whole situation, because the Londoners' lack of familiarity with Africans and Saartjie's large buttocks. The tradition of freak show was a well-established culture in Europe at this time, and then historians argued that that was how Saartjie was first displayed. Saartjie never allowed herself to be exhibited nude, and there was an account of her appearance in London in 1810 which makes it clear that she was wearing a garment but a tight-fitting tone. Not long after, a British abolitionist society, the African Association, conducted a newspaper campaign for her release. So this is becoming weird. Hendrik Caesar responded that she had the right to earn a living and even compared her with the contemporary Irish giants who exhibited themselves as well. Well, if he answers on her behalf, then I smell some human trafficking, exploitation, coercion, don't you? Let me know your take on this. So the African Association took the matter to court to give her liberty to say whatever she wanted to say, whether she was exhibited by her own consent. Now, what's really surprising and even unsettling is that she stated that she was not under restraint. She had no sexual abuse happen to her and she had come to London on her own free will. So what do? She also said she does not wish to return back home to her family and understood perfectly that she was guaranteed half of the profits. So she was playing the game along. Do you really think this is true? I don't know. The case was therefore dismissed and that there was no direct evidence that she was lying. Do you think she was under coercion? We do not really know for sure, do we? After all this drama, when the novelty wore off London, she was sold again. This time to a showman in Paris, and they will now dare to call other people primitive and barbaric, right? A new country, same cruelty. This time she wasn't just exhibited for the crowd. Scientists from the Museum d'Histoire Naturelle studied her, measuring every inch of her body. If we take this into context, right, the psychological impact of oppression in South Africa, where she's coming from, then one could probably understand if she felt amused too, to be fascinated, like people being fascinated of her body beyond her homeland. But before we dive deep into what happened when she moved to Paris, oh my God, let's talk about her name now. Saartjie Baartman. Baartman. So Saartjie is the diminutive form for Sarah. Now, diminutive names like, pet names you use for children or to express tenderness. In some cases, it can also be contempt, used to belittle someone. So I don't know which one, this Dutch name implies. Is it now a pet name or, belittle her? Let me know what you think. Let's not forget that she was also called Portento Venus. Why was she called Portento? Was a Dutch colonial era name for the Khoikhoi people, and Venus generally meant goddess of love and fertility. So I think that explains it all. It was reported that she died at the age of 26 in France. You probably have two questions right now. How did she get there? How did she die? Remember I told you she was sold off to Paris? Yes, that's how she got there. She probably thought maybe this new place will be better, but Paris was worse, colder, cruel, and far more curious. A man called Henry Taylor took Saartjie there around September in 1840. Taylor then sold her to a man sometimes reported to be an animal trainer, Jean Rux, I don't know how to pronounce the name, Rux, exhibited her under more pressured conditions for 15 months at the Palais Royal in Paris. So in France, she may have been effectively enslaved. In Paris, her exhibition became more clearly entangled with scientific racism. French scientists were so curious about whether she had elongated labia. She was also the subject of several scientific paintings at the Jardin d'Ureur. Don't know my French people. As if that wasn't enough, she was brought out as an exhibit at wealthy people's party and private salons. In Paris, Baartman's promoter did not need to concern themselves with slavery charges. At some point, a collar was placed around her neck, although it is really unclear whether that was just a prop for the performance. Saartjie died on the 29th of December 1815, around the age of 26. French naturalist Cuvier conducted a dissection, but not an autopsy, to inquire into the reasons of her death. Can you imagine? Her skeleton, brain, genitals were preserved by this French naturalist and displayed in Paris Museum for more than 150 years. God, these people, I don't know what to describe. What would you use to describe this? Disgusting comes to my mind. Her skull was stolen in 1827 but returned a few months later. The restored skeleton and skull continued to arouse the interest of visitors. Even after her death, she was a spectacle. But sometimes truth takes a long road home. From the 1940s onwards, there were sporadic calls to return her remains. In 1994, after decades of pressure from South Africa, Nelson Mandela himself requested her remains to be returned. And in 2002, they finally returned her to rest in her homeland. Her return wasn't just a burial, it was a reckoning. It forced museums and historians to question, what else have we justified in the name of knowledge? And what does it mean to give dignity back to the dead? Saartjie Baartman was not the only Khoikhoi, I don't know, I'm sorry if that's not how they pronounce it, Khoikhoi to have been taken from her homeland. Historian Niall Parsons writes of two Khoikhoi children, 13 and 6 years old respectively, who were taken from South Africa and displayed at a holiday fair in Elberfeld, Prussia in 1845. The whole thing of displaying human beings is so barbaric. But Saartjie Baartman, Saartjie Baartman, still may be better known because she was the first Khoikhoi taken from her land, or because of the extensive explorations as well as the mistreatment she received during and after her lifetime. They displayed her in cages, studied her in lab, kept her bones for centuries, but in the end, she went home because even after death, truth always finds its way back to the soil. To wrap this up, I personally think that it's ironic that they call her Venus, which means the goddess of love, when she really actually never really experienced love. And Joana, and it hurts to really tell the story, but Africa's untold stories must be told.